Lord of Mysteries. Fire of Destruction Chapter 41 to 60. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Adrian still managed to make 7 feet jumps through the shadows before his spirituality warned him that he was taking it too far. So when the 7th jump finished, the redhead took off this burnt band because the ravings were getting stronger but still couldn't reach the level of the office ones. Thanks to the jumps, the redhead managed to reach the limits of East Borough. The redhead was trembling, he was quite pale, covered in ash and blood as well as a strong cough. He still had his mask on along with his jacket so the punishers wouldn't be able to recognize him. He couldn't walk the streets of Backland looking like he'd just gotten out of a war. So he had no choice but to move between the alleys and roofs to avoid being seen. After moving like this for a long time, Adrian managed to reach his house. As soon as he entered, the redhead collapsed on the floor due to his injuries and lack of spirituality, but he still wasn't safe enough. So while grunting in pain he went to the shower and took a bath with cold water, cleaning the blood, alcohol, and ash that covered him. Then he went to his room and began to use his first aid kit to treat his injuries. After bandaging and stitching his chest, the redhead grabbed a silver container and placed the burnt band on it, and then sealed it with a wall of spirituality. After that, the redhead finally fell asleep on his bed and slept without having the energy to see himself in the mirror. The next day, Adrian woke up at 9 a.m., an hour before his class with Isengard. When the redhead got up he saw the silver container. Undoing the wall of spirituality the redhead saw the burned band. It was a thick black band that due to the flames had a burnt appearance. From Adrian's experience this band allowed him to connect with the shadows and if he applied more spirituality he was able to move between them a decent distance of up to a maximum of 15 meters per jump. This ability Adrian decided to name it Shadow Leap, and the negative effect would be that while you have it on you will hear the ravings of the true creator, and the longer you wear it the stronger it will become. Adrian calculates that with his current strength, he could only wear it for a maximum of 5 minutes. Ads by PubFuture. To avoid this it was simple, you just didn't have to put it on your arm and you would only be impulsive to do crazier actions. But that was manageable. Band of Shadows. Ash Band. Birkin Band. When Adrian saw this band he also started to think of a name for it. Burnt Band. After remembering how the redhead got it, he thought it would be appropriate for this artifact to have this name. Burnt Band was his first extraordinary artifact and although Adrian was very happy about its extremely useful ability, he couldn't help but think that to get it he had to listen to a rap that almost killed him. It was lucky that he did not undergo changes to his body like the others in the building. Seeing that it was 9:30, the redhead got ready for his classes while thinking about how to explain to Isengard that he already knew how to speak Hermes and Elvish. Those who listen to the true creator's ravings will be able to win certain things as long as they can survive them. While thinking about that, Adrian passed by the mirror in his room and saw something out of the corner of his eye that made him stop short. Turning slowly to the mirror, the redhead touched his face. His eyes were now a beautiful bright crimson red. Shit. If explaining that he now knew how to speak Hermes and elves would be difficult now his eyes would be ridiculous. Ads by PubFuture. Apparently, his body did start to change but because he managed to enter the City of Calamities in time he managed to save himself. Giving an even stronger sigh, the redhead could only think on a plan on the way to the class. While keeping the burnt band in his pocket, he headed to the detective's house. When the servant arrived, he looked at him with great surprise as he took him to class. No doubt the education he received while preparing to be a servant was the only thing that prevented him from commenting on the change in his eyes. Now sitting in the living room and somewhat nervous, Adrian waited for Isengard to arrive. After a while the aforementioned arrived and looked at him with surprise when he saw his eyes. "My student, would you be able to explain to me what happened to you?" While saying that, Isengard stared at Adrian and he decided to do what best came to mind. Lie. He could not tell that he tanked the ravings because no one would believe him and they would think he was crazy. Even he believed that if Isengard believed him he would send him to purify himself in the church but Adrian did not want to do that because he did not have time. He couldn't wait for them to verify that there was nothing wrong with him because in 4 weeks Joe would arrive and in a few months the case of the demon dog would arrive, and at the end of the year Miss Despair would arrive. Nothing assured him that she wouldn't feel unconsciously attracted to him. With the luck he was having, it was more than likely that he would run into both of them. So he had to lie to a Sequence 7 detective. Is it possible to completely lie to a 7-sequence detective? Yes, it is. But Adrian decided to reveal some secrets of his own between them so that the biggest lie would be hidden. So with a smile on his face, the Red Eye smiled at Isengard. With pleasure, teacher. When Adrian was still in his previous world, he was someone quite introverted, but it wasn't because he was shy, he just didn't like parties very much. This made his family think of him as quiet and calm, but the truth was quite different. He had an incredible talent for fighting, and he showed it when he sent a robber to the hospital with multiple broken bones and severe concussions. Although due to this he was grounded for 2 weeks, he also earned a nickname in his family, which was Little Rocky. This happened when he was 15 years old, and thanks to that he began to go to martial arts classes, and by the age of 19 he became an international champion in his category, but all that went down the drain when he broke his arms in a serious traffic accident and he never fully recovered. This left him in severe pain that lasted until he recovered after months, but numerous times he woke up in the middle of the night due to the pain and cried from it. His mom always woke up to see how he was doing, and he had to lie to her so she wouldn't worry too much. When she went to visit him at the hospital, it broke his heart to see her like that, with red eyes from crying, with scattered makeup and disheveled hair. This made him develop a good ability to lie, because if one is able to look at his own mother's tearful face and lie, then there is no one to who you are not capable of lying. Leaving memories aside, the current situation would test all those months that he spent in bed and with his mother. Isengard was in front of him with his pipe in his mouth, looking at him intently as he waited for an explanation. So while maintaining his smile, the red-eyed looked at his teacher and began with the lie that he had planned on the way here. Teacher, you know that I am a provoker, right? This question caught Isengard off guard, and he looked at the redhead strangely. Yes, I know. Not long ago you were promoted. So you know I was only a hunter 2 weeks ago when I first became a Beyander. This caused Isengard, who was with his pipe in his mouth, to freeze up, and his pipe fell from his mouth to the ground. He was looking in huge surprise at the boy in front of him. 2 weeks. Being promoted to Sequence 8 in 2 weeks is impossible, but he just got the formula at my party, so it must be true. But how? Isengard's mind began to work at maximum power to try to make sense of this madness. He had ignored this big detail that he was supposed to have noticed but didn't realize. But why? Not realizing the episode that Isengard suffered, Adrian continued speaking. I joined a hunting club, and during that time I always went hunting in the woods. This made me feel like something melted inside of me every time I hunted an animal, and after hunting for those weeks I felt as if something completely melted inside of me and brought a wonderful feeling. While the redhead said that, Isengard's surprise only grew more and more. Did this boy figure it out so quickly? Is he a genius? Those kinds of thoughts filled Isengard's head while the light in which he looked at Adrian changed. But as he regained his composure, he also tried to get back to the topic at hand. I don't understand what all this has to do with what I asked you, my student. I'm getting to that, teacher. You see, when that feeling came to me, I had the instinct that promotion would be safer for me, but this left me with several doubts that I could only verify when I became a provoker, and that was if I acted, guided by the name of the potion, this feeling of melting would appear again. When he said that, Isengard could only sigh with some pride. The boy really had figured it out so quickly. When I felt like I was half melted, my eyes changed to this color, and I don't quite know why, and I was hoping you could tell me, but you asked me first. And that was another truth, even if it was a bit inaccurate, since his provoker potion was currently 4/6 digested, and if he focused on performing for 2 weeks he would be able to digest it before the end of June. Leaving that aside, the surprise enveloped Isengard again, and he couldn't help but laugh out loud as he applauded him. This surprised Adrian and made him widen his eyes, trying to think of what he had said to make Isengard react like that. Teacher, is everything alright? Everything is fine, my student. I'm just extremely surprised that you figure it out so quickly, and I honestly didn't think you would. Feeling the insult, the corners of the redhead's mouth trembled. What you have accomplished is certainly praiseworthy and shows that you are a worthy member of the church. What you were doing is certainly acting, and that allowed you to digest the potion so quickly. and it's no surprise that the digestion of some potions brings certain changes to the body, so you don't have to worry about the change in your eyes. Quote, Professor, what do you mean by digestion? Picking up his pipe from the floor and wiping it clean with a handkerchief, Isengar inhaled again before answering. What I mean is that you discovered the acting method, and that allowed you to digest the potion. When you drink the potion, due to the mental remnants of the used materials, our bodies take a long time to forcibly accommodate the potion, taking about 3 years before you can advance the sequence, but that doesn't make it any safer and there's a big risk of losing control. But if you use the acting method, you can fool those remnants and accommodate the potion much faster, and that sensation you felt is what is it called? Digestion. After saying that, Isengar took a puff on his pipe while Adrian showed a surprised expression. Obviously fake surprise. After that, Isengar looked very seriously at Adrian. But you have to remember that you're only acting, because if you get carried away with acting, you'll lose yourself in it. At Isengar's very serious expression, Adrian nodded slightly, and this caused Isengar to get up from his chair as he took one last puff on his pipe and tossed the remains into an ashtray. I'll be back in a moment, so wait for me here, Adrian. Nodding again to Isengar's words, the detective went up to the next floor. As Isengar left the room, Adrian breathed a small sigh of relief. It seemed that he had managed to divert the attention of the detective. It was quite a gamble on his part to reveal that he knew about the acting method, but it worked, and the detective attributed his change in eye color to the digestion of the potion. And when it's time to pretend about not knowing Hermes or Elvish, it would be much easier, and he should only show advanced progress little by little. After a while, Isengar returned to the room with a piece of paper in hand and a silver container. Looking at the paper and familiar container, Adrian couldn't help but feel a certain similarity with a certain event that Klein went through at the beginning of his story. Isengar sat across from Adrian as he placed the paper in front of him and held the container in his hands. Have you told anyone else about the acting method? I haven't told anyone but you, teacher. Nodding to the redhead's response, Isengar handed the paper over to Adrian, allowing him to see the contents. It looked like some kind of contract, and this made the corner of the red eye's mouth tremble slightly. Yep, although I was expecting something more flashy like swearing with my hand on a bone sword, at least I won't have a GPS chip on me all the time, Adrian thought as he read the contents of the contract. It was exactly what he expected. It was a contract not to share the information of the acting method with anyone who doesn't know it, no matter if they are inside the church. Ads by PubFuture. Pretending not to understand, Adrian raised an eyebrow at Isengar as if asking what was this. Seeing his student's expression, Isengar chuckled and explained what it was. My student, the knowledge of the method acting is forbidden to be shared, and all members who manage to discover it must sign a contract to prevent its spread. Still pretending he didn't know, Adrian looked doubtfully at Isengar. A contract is not going to prevent it from spreading. A simple contract will not be able to do that, but a notary contract can. A notary contract is a special contract that makes the person who signs it obliged to comply with its content. Adrian's eyes widened in surprise and he moved away from the contract a little. Again, this reaction was false. Seeing the redhead's actions, Isengar chuckled again and received a sharp glare from Adrian. Don't worry, my student, right now it's just a piece of paper and it doesn't contain anything special. I gave it to you so you can review its contents and tell me if there's anything you don't like so we can change it before you sign the real contract. Heaving a sigh of relief, Adrian nodded to Isengar and took the contract in hand, and seriously reviewed the entire contract. After reading it 10 times and failing to find anything strange or any hidden deal, the redhead agreed to sign it. Nodding to this, Isengar asked for the contract back and then placed it in the center of the table. He then grabbed the container and, releasing the wall of spirituality, Isengar pulled from it the familiar ring. Placing the ring on his left hand, he then placed his hand on the contract. Ads by PubFuture. Closing his eyes, a golden light lightly enveloped the ring, and this light also enveloped the contract, causing its white color to become light gold. After this happened, Isengar quickly removed the ring and put it in the container and reapplied the wall of spirituality. After that, he passed the contract back to Adrian along with a pen so he could sign it. Grabbing the contract and feeling that he was now kind of hot, the redhead went back to reading the contract. This made the corners of Isengar's mouth quiver slightly, but he inwardly applauded the redhead's attitude. After seeing that the contract was still the same and no new content had appeared, Adrian grabbed his pen and signed his full name. After placing his signature, the contract shone slightly and the red-eyed man felt as if something were tying him to comply with the content of the contract. This undoubtedly made him feel more respect towards the Beyonders of the Sun pathway. After doing all that, Isengar grabbed the contract and put it inside his jacket. That would be all, my student. Now we can continue with the class. Nodding to Isengar, Adrian grabbed one of Hermes's books and got ready for class. The class was like the others and Isengar was undoubtedly still surprised by the intelligence of the redhead. It hadn't been long since he started teaching him Hermes and he seemed to understand the language almost completely, so he decided that next week they would start with ancient Hermes. Apart from all that, the class continued normally until 3 p.m. and because Isengar had work to do, Adrian couldn't stay for tea. So what he did was go to his house and grab his mask and cloak, and headed to Braveheart's bar. Adrian used the burnt band to move through the shadows and avoid being seen since the punishers were most likely looking for him. Stepping out of the shadows in the vicinity of the bar, Adrian took off the burnt band and stuffed it into his pocket. Entering the Braveheart's bar, Adrian went with the bartender and he told him where the old man was. Entering the room, Adrian managed to see the old man who was in a chair drinking, and Marich who was playing cards. When the old man saw who it was that had entered, he simply gave a blank look and raised an eyebrow at Adrian. Greeting the old man, Adrian removed his mask and lowered the hood of his cloak, and approached Marich who was still playing. When the old man saw the redhead's eyes, he looked at him in shock and looked at the glass of wine he was drinking, and then looked back at the redhead. After that, he simply placed the glass of wine on the table and went outside to get some air. Sitting down next to Marich, he shot him a look and raised an eyebrow after meeting Adrian's eyes. Seeing the look the redhead was receiving, he scratched his head somewhat embarrassed. It is a long story. I am not interested. An eyebrow twitched at Marich's quick response, but he just let it go. I want to know if you have a potion that treats broken bones. At this request, Marich lowered the cards and looked at the red-eyed from head to toe. How many bones and which one? One rib. Marich was silent as he looked at Adrian and after a moment he nodded. I have potions that treat broken bones and can make them heal in 2 weeks. Ads by PubFuture. How much would it be? £15 and you only will need one. This relieved Adrian a lot and he quickly paid Marich. Then he made one of his zombies come out and after 20 minutes he came back with a vial full of a white liquid. Then he handed the vial to Adrian and returned to his place to continue what he was doing. Looking at the vial, Adrian looked at Marich for an explanation. Seeing Adrian's look, Marich just sighed again. As I told you, that potion will accelerate the healing of your bones and will make them recover in 2 weeks. The only thing you will have to take into account is that you will have to eat much more than normal to replenish the energy that your body will be using. How much more? About triple the normal. Taking a sigh, Adrian nodded and drank the potion right there in front of Marich. This made Marich simply shake his head and he continued with his game. The taste of the potion was horrible, tasting like expired milk with chili and orange, but after swallowing it whole Adrian began to cough due to the taste. Fuck, what a taste of crap. As Adrian coughed he felt his body heat up a bit and his chest aches slightly, but that was all the symptoms. Thanking Marich, the redhead put on his mask and pulled up his hood, and left the room. A while later Sharon appeared in the room and sat quietly in a corner. After using the burnt band again to move through the shadows and using the alleys to avoid being seen, the redhead managed to get home safely. Being at home, the redhead already felt the hunger that the potion brought, so he began to prepare his lunch. After a while, Adrian could see his table full of food and he couldn't help but appreciate that all those extra calories would be used for his treatment, so while he grabbed a white bread he dipped it in the mashed potatoes, and began to eat. He couldn't help but think about what he would have to do these 2 weeks. Due to the run-in he had with the punishers in East Borough, he decided it would be better not to show up around there for a while. The healing of his rib was the priority and now Adrian was marking things to do in his mind. While he put a piece of grilled meat in his mouth, he thought that he would have to go buy more bullets at the club and he could take advantage and talk more with the members. So Adrian was eating for an hour and after eating everything, he went to his room to take a nap. When he woke up it was already night and Adrian could feel that despite everything he ate his stomach was empty, so he went to the kitchen to prepare more food. While eating the redhead was humming to himself. Finally, after eating enough to feed an entire family of 4, Adrian went to sleep and didn't wake up until the next day. After a heavy breakfast, Adrian went to the hunting club quietly while thinking that maybe it is a good idea to hunt deer in the forest to avoid spending so much money on food. When he arrived at the club before entering, Adrian realized a problem, and that was the fact of how he was going to explain the color of his eyes. Cursing under his breath that he hadn't thought of it, Adrian managed to remember the second, provocateur, skill. Gaslighting. It seems that I will finally be able to use this ability. While thinking about that, he opened the door, and the redhead managed to see that as always Robert was devoutly reading his favorite book. And he couldn't seem to hear the door open again, so shaking his head he walked over to Robert, making his steps a little more heavy so they make more sound. When he got closer, Robert finally noticed his presence and he put the book away somewhat embarrassed, but then he noticed the change in his eyes and he widened his eyes in shock as he looked at him in alarm. "Mr. Adrian, what happened to your eyes?" Hearing the concern dripping from Robert's voice, Adrian couldn't help but feel bad that he would have to use that ability on someone so good. "Forgive me, Robert, I promise I'll make it up to you by buying you another book written by Miss Magician, and I'll even try to get her to sign it," Adrian thought as he saw Robert's delicate, worried face. With a slight smile, he answered him. "What are you worrying about, Mr. Robert? My eyes are fine." "But Mr. Adrian, your eyes are red." "My eyes have always been red, Mr. Robert." Robert's face grew more and more confused as if he couldn't make sense of what the redhead was saying. "But before they were reddish-brown." "Surely you are confused, Mr. Robert. My eyes have always been red." Adrian didn't give him much time to think and cut him off in the middle of his sentence, causing Robert to cringe slightly. "But that's not. Mr. Robert, as I said, you don't have to worry. My eyes are fine and they have always been red. I'm sure that due to the lighting in the room, you could have been confused, but they have always been red." Robert scratched his head, extremely confused and making some sense out of Adrian's words. "You may be right, Mr. Adrian, the lighting often causes me to confuse the colors, please excuse me." At this, Adrian gave him a sweet smile as he patted his shoulder. "Don't worry, Robert, I can just call you Robert, right? It happens to me a lot. Only if you allow me to call you Adrian, and sorry again," was what Robert said with a slightly flushed face as he tried to use his hand to cover his mouth like a lady. This reaction made Adrian also blush a little and he gave a small laugh. "Of course, I wouldn't mind that, so I'll see you later, Robert." Adrian's response slightly cheered Robert and he chuckled. Ads by PubFuture. "Of course, Adrian, see you later." Adrian nodded and went up to the next floor with calm steps while Robert stared at his back. When Adrian left Robert's sight, he grabbed the book again and read again. Going up to the floor, the redhead managed to see the three musketeers playing pool together while Victor was yelling about canned wolffish. Gaining an idea of what they were talking about, Adrian shook his head as he approached the small group. As Victor continued to speak aloud, Isaac and Charles saw Adrian coming up behind Victor and waved at him, but they froze when they saw glowing red eyes. The reaction of his friends surprised Victor and he turned with the pool stick in hand ready to attack whatever was behind him. "Who dares?" Victor's voice died just as fast as he dropped the stick when he saw the redhead's eyes. Seeing the reaction of the three, Adrian sighed heavily and shook his head strongly. This reaction was getting very boring. After doing the same thing he did with Robert, Adrian thought it would be more difficult than with the secretary, but Charles surprisingly made it a lot easier due to giving him a lot of insight when he mentioned that lighting can affect how one perceives colors, so that was easier than I thought. Now they were chatting while playing billiards and Adrian was playing better than last time, but he still lost. Ignoring that small part, they went on to play cards and Victor offered to play with money, but Adrian and Isaac flatly refused as they looked at Charles, who was smiling on the other side. "So Mr. Adrian, how have you been this time? It's been a while since you showed up at the club." "I've just been pretty busy, but whenever I could I would come here to see Robert and Mr. Grievous." Responding to Isaac while looking at his cards and lamenting that they were horrible. "Seems like you guys got close around that time, huh? He's quite a nice person to be around, although the most I've seen him do is read that book since I hired him a few months ago." As Victor looked suspiciously at Adrian, Isaac spoke again while maintaining a poker face. "You should learn more from Mr. Robert and maybe women wouldn't be so disgusted to get close to you." Ads by PubFuture. Charles punched Victor's pride hard and Victor slammed his palms down on the table as he rose from his seat. What did you say, Ner? I win. When he said that, Charles put his cards on the table and went to help himself to something to drink while Victor stared dumbly at Charles's cards. The corners of Isaac's and Adrian's mouths began to quiver as they were barely able to contain their laughter. Isaac took advantage and added salt to the wound. And so you wanted to play betting money, did you forget that Mr. Charles is invincible in this game? Shut up, Isaac. Looking at Victor's sour expression, Isaac and Adrian couldn't contain themselves anymore and laughed out loud at him, making his face turn red with anger. Come back here, Charles, let's play another one. Charles turned slightly with a glass of wine in hand and simply shook his shoulders and calmly continued to drink. This made Adrian and Isaac laugh harder as it seemed that Victor's ears wanted to smoke like a teapot. They were like that until noon when Adrian said goodbye to the Musketeers and went downstairs. Saying goodbye to Robert, who was reading as always, Adrian went home for lunch. While eating his lunch, Adrian took advantage and took out the documents of the policeman that the boss of Bloodmark had bribed. The assignment from Braveheart's bar was to obtain this list and deliver it to the bar on June 22 at 7:30 p.m. The reward was £80 and originally Adrian thought it would be easy money. But then what happened and now Adrian felt that he had been cheated and the pay was too low. Shaking his head, Adrian put those documents down and then took out the document that dealt with the territories and information that the Bloodmark had about other gangs. The document was decently thick and neatly arranged, allowing Adrian to read it with ease. While eating he was reading and there was a very good amount of information in it. A large part of the gangs that were in the East Borough. There was a huge amount of them, after all, it was the most populated area in all of Backland and the amount of them makes a lot of sense. There were about 25 gangs each with different numbers of members, power, territory, etc. After eating everything, Adrian washed the dishes and went to his room, and lay on his bed to take a nap. Looking at the ceiling of his room, Adrian thought of the 7 most important gangs that were highlighted in the document. Black Skull, Z-Manger Gang, Dead Rose, Red Moon, Deadshot, Red Skeleton, The Creed. The Z-Manger Gang caught his attention because they appeared in Klein's story while the rest caught his attention for much more special reasons. According to the documents, these gangs focused on kidnapping people and selling them as slaves. This made him associate this with another important character. Capum. If these gangs dealt in human trafficking, then there was no doubt that Capum had his filthy hands in it. The document marked the territories of these gangs quite well and even marked which were the ones that kidnapped the most and which victims they preferred. Many parts of this document also talked about the leaders of these and their characteristics. Some made Adrian want to throw up. An example would be that the head of Black Skull had necrophilic tendencies. Closing this document, Adrian set these gangs as a target for when he recovers and would use them to act. With them he would have no mercy. Breaking a board under his wardrobe, Adrian hid the documents there and covered them. After that Adrian finally went for a nap. While Adrian was sleeping peacefully, something was happening in the East Borough. In one of the alleys, one could see the bodies of multiple homeless people, and some of these were covered in a black fire while others were holding their heart area as if they had suffered a heart attack. While they were like this, a shadow calmly advanced calmly as if it did not care about the scene in front of it. The sound of heels hitting the floor rang throughout the alley and one could see how one of the bums was still alive, but he had the tendons in his legs cut and was crawling trying to get away from the person. He didn't seem to be able to scream, it seemed that his voice had left him and before he could go any further, heels sank into his back preventing him from moving forward. The homeless man's eyes were filled with terror, but before he could run any further a delicate hand with a red manicure tore out a piece of his hair. The woman also took the man's blood and placed it in a voodoo doll that she held in her hands. After wrapping the hair around the doll's neck and spreading the blood across the doll's chest, the doll lit up in a black fire and the man's chest began to sink as if something very heavy was stepping on his chest, completely destroying his lungs and heart. The man died slowly and in agony. When all this happened, a female laugh rang throughout the alley and the woman disappeared from it. Adrian woke up peacefully in the night and made himself a hearty dinner again while humming to himself again. It seemed that it became a little habit when he had dinner, something that he did not usually do when he was still Joa. Shaking his head, the redhead finished his dinner and went to sleep again. Waking up and having a heavy breakfast, the redhead headed towards Isengar's house for his daily classes. Already in the class with Isengar, Adrian couldn't help but notice that Isengar was somewhat stressed. When he asked him about it, he said that when he had more information he would tell him, but that they couldn't have tea since he had to go out to investigate a heavy case. While Adrian returned home he couldn't help but think about what Isengar told him, but without having any information he couldn't give himself an idea what the detective could be working on. When he passed one of the main streets something caught his attention. Brutal murders in East Borough by a newspaper for the details. A newspaper boy was yelling while waving a newspaper in the middle of the street and the headline made Adrian have a bad feeling. Buying a newspaper from the boy, the redhead quickly came home and read it. Obviously, the information on the state of the bodies had been changed, but from what Adrian could interpret he knew that the problems were getting closer and closer. Multiple corpses found burned and several others that seemed to have suffered a heart attack. Now the odds of running into a witch were skyrocketing, and this witch didn't seem to mind keeping a low profile. Shit. Holding the burnt band, Adrian cursed under his breath as he tried to think of what to do next. If he came to face the witch, his only option would be to escape because his rib was still broken, he couldn't fight it 100% and he still hadn't digested the provoker potion. He had everything to lose, so his only hope was to escape. Shit. Looking at his ceiling, Adrian could only curse again and simply stayed like that for a long time. Today is Wednesday, June 21st. While Adrian was trying to think of a way to avoid meeting the witch in another part of Backland, a few people were a bit busy. To be specific, it would be a seer and a warrior who were busy. Nathan was holding wooden dowsing rods, shaped like two straight metal wires that taper at one edge. He was now using the dowsing rod seeking to find Chaplin because attempts with other divination arts had failed miserably. When he tried to use dream divination to find the redhead, all he could see was endless darkness. When he tried to use pendulum divination it had failed and he was not even able to know if Chaplin was still in Backland. The only reason they were still in Backland searching was that Nathan's spirituality told him that he was still here. The only thing that seemed to work was dowsing rod seeking, and even so they had been moving through remote parts of Backland for the last 6 days. Numerous times it had taken them to Braveheart's bar, other times to different parts of the East Borough, and once to a building that had recently burned down. They had been moving like this since Friday and never managed to see even the shadow of Mr. Chaplin. You'd think it would be easy to find someone with such striking hair color, but they weren't having any luck. The two of them were running out of time and Nathan knew it. Every day that passed he was having nightmares about the storm, and whenever they fell into the water Mr. Chaplin saved them. But in these nightmares, the storm was slowly getting stronger. A weight settled on their backs and through dreams, Nathan calculated that something would happen to them at the beginning of July, and if they couldn't find Chaplin they wouldn't survive the storm. Trying to calm his mind so it doesn't affect divination, Nathan kept moving forward as Sasha followed. Sasha was looking at her partner's back as she silently lamented that she wasn't able to help him. The warrior pathway, although this was one of the strongest physically in low sequences, but due to the lack of mysterious abilities she was of no use in the search. And this bothered her a lot. Nathan had been very stressed during this time and Sasha could tell, these nightmares were already taking enough of him. And now they were looking relentlessly for Chaplin's traces, but they looked like blind dogs with no muzzles because they seemed to move in circles. She wasn't talking to Nathan so that he would be able to focus and use divination without much trouble. And so they kept moving until they passed a 2-story hunting club. The rod remained pointed for a while, but then it pointed elsewhere. Sighing, they moved on and night came and the crimson moon hung quietly in the dark sky. Nathan, that's enough, let's go home and keep looking tomorrow. Wait Sasha, let's continue a little more, we are close, I can feel it. Like when we got to that collapsed building. It's different this time, the feeling is stronger, so please just a little more. Nathan turned around and looked at Sasha with his blue eyes and she, seeing the look of this, just sighed and agreed to continue looking, but only for another half hour. Thanking Sasha, Nathan continued to use dowsing rod seeking as they moved through a residential area. Adrian had now finished dinner and he was preparing to sleep without knowing that he was about to receive some nocturnal visits. Nathan followed the path that led to the wooden rod, and after 15 minutes of moving in this middle-class neighborhood, they managed to arrive in front of a house. The rod was kept pointed at this house and began to vibrate slightly, and Nathan felt his spirituality being drained at an alarming rate, so he had to let go of the rod. The rod fell to the ground as Nathan dropped to one knee as he took long breaths. Sasha quickly moved to his side as she checked to make sure he was okay. Nathan nodded to her and pointed to the house in front of them. After recovering a little air, he was able to speak. Mr. Chaplin should live here. Click. The sound of a revolver hammer made Nathan and Sasha freeze. They hadn't heard anyone move behind them. May I know what you are doing in front of my house? The familiar voice made the seer and warrior breathe a slight sigh of relief, but while they had managed to find Chaplin, now they had to explain why they were there. Whereas Adrian was just cursing in his head. Thanks to his senses, he was able to hear how someone was passing in front of his house, but he had not given it much importance. But when he heard something fall to the ground and a familiar voice, the redhead had put on the burnt band and he had used Shadow Leap to be able to stand behind them. Seeing the great height of the woman and together with the voice of the man, Adrian was sure that it was Nathan and Sasha, so giving a strong sigh that made Nathan and Sasha scared, he ordered them to turn around slowly. Nathan and Sasha slowly turned around and managed to see a scene that terrified them a little. Adrian was in the shadows 7 meters from them, wearing a white shirt that had in the area of the chest open with black pants, and his bright red eyes glowed slightly in the dark. A very disturbing scene. I appreciate you visiting me, but I would have preferred it to be daytime. The calm voice of the redhead sounded through the heads of Nathan and Sasha, and they watched as the redhead lowered the revolver. I hope you guys have a good explanation for this. And here it is, the end of the special of 10 chapters. Remember guys that from now on, every 2 or 3 weeks on the weekends there would be Antor special. I hope you guys like it and remember to comment because I love to see your opinions and memes. See you tomorrow. Also, some more little information on Adrian's past was revealed. Hope that you all like it. Sitting inside the house in the living room across from Adrian, Nathan and Sasha couldn't help but feel like children who had been mischievous and were getting a scolding. The redhead was looking at them while sitting cross-legged and resting his head on his palm. The fact that the only lighting was a lamp on the table made it look quite intimidating. How those red eyes seemed to glow in the shadow generated by his hair was terrifying. A cold sweat ran down their backs and Nathan wiped some sweat from his forehead while Sasha played with her fingers while looking at the ground. The glasses of water that the redhead had served them were untouched on the table due to how nervous they were. Well, are you going to tell me the reason for your visit or what? Adrian's solemn voice managed to shake them both a bit and they straightened up. Mr. Chaplin, we are sorry for bothering you at this time and for coming unannounced, but let us explain. Let us introduce ourselves again. I am Nathan Ram, a seer from the Intis Republic, and my partner is Sasha Strauss, a warrior from the Fasak Empire. At this, Adrian nodded slightly with a raised eyebrow, and this made Nathan a little nervous and he tried to explain faster. I was part of the Intis intelligence department for 3 years, in which I got enough contribution to become a Beyander of the seer pathway. After that for 2 years I kept working there, but no matter what I did I couldn't accumulate enough to get the next formula potion. Then one day a man invaded my house while I was sleeping and woke me up. At this, Nathan swallowed a little saliva and drank some water from his glass. I was very scared and thought that he was going to kill me, but this man surprised me. He offered me to join a secret organization where I could get the following formulas for my path. He told me that he would come back in 2 days to hear my answer, and after that he disappeared in flames. I was very scared all night and I couldn't sleep. Taking another sip of water, Nathan wiped the sweat from his brow again. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to report what happened to my superior, but when I made a divination the answer would be that it would end very badly for me. And when I divined if I should accept the man's offer, the answer was also bad but better than reporting it. And when I did divination if I should ignore it, the answer was that I would die, so with no other option I joined and accepted the man's offer. The more Nathan talked, the more Adrian could figure out where this was going, and he couldn't help but curse in his heart. The secret organization was called the Secret Order, and the man was my superior for a few months. The missions they entrusted to me were to investigate some of my colleagues in the intelligence department and send them the information without being caught. But the problem was that when I was investigating one inside the house of one of my colleagues, I was discovered and things escalated, and I had no other option but to kill him. Nathan trembled slightly now as he continued his story, and Sasha put her hand on his shoulder to calm him down. When this happened, I knew I couldn't hide or explain it. How was I supposed to explain that I was a member of a secret organization that asked me to investigate my comrades? And when I was going to report what happened to my superior in the secret order, I decided to use dream divination to find out what would happen if I did. And what I saw was my death, although I couldn't see the reason well. After saying that, Nathan looked at the ground and continued talking. Because of that, I decided to run away, and that's what I've been doing for the last few months. It was during one of those days that I met Sasha. Changing his gaze, the redhead looked at Sasha. At this, Sasha straightened up while her mouth trembled. Mr. Chaplain, I was a member of the Church of the God of Combat for 2 years because I was already born a warrior and my mother was a believer. On one of our missions, we were up against the forces of the witch cult, and due to a horrible mistake on my part, almost my entire team died. I only survived because my team leader was able to hold off the witches while reinforcements arrived. Because of this, I was expelled from the church and the empire. When Sasha said this, she looked at the floor again while playing with her fingers, and this time Nathan was the one who comforted her. I was living doing jobs in Byam, and in one of those I met Nathan. Since then we did a lot of jobs together, but one day, Nathan had a revelation in a dream that his trail had been found. He told me and apologized for getting me into his troubles and that he was leaving Byam for Backland. But I refused that and decided to accompany him. The aura in the room became somewhat awkward, and Adrian couldn't help but comment on it in his heart, so he sighed and looked at Nathan and Sasha in front of him with a raised eyebrow. They are tragic stories without a doubt, but that does not answer why you came for me. Given this, Nathan quickly settled into his place and began to explain his dream to Adrian and how they would face something at the beginning of July and that only he could help them. Adrian just looked at them with red eyes and raised an eyebrow. What's in it for me then? What's in it for me then? At Adrian's words, Nathan couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief because he didn't refuse, so there was a chance. We can pay you for your protection, Mr. Adrian, or we can help you get any formula you need. Adrian shook his head and drank some of the water from his glass. He wasn't interested in the money or the formula, but after thinking about it for a moment, a brilliant idea flashed in his head, so he gave the seer and warrior a small smile. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to start preparing the ritual for sequence 4. Money is not a problem for me, while the formula, I have several ways to get it, but there is one thing that you can do for me. At the beginning of the sentence, Nathan couldn't help but feel a little desperate because they didn't have anyone else, but when Adrian talked about the alternative payment method, he wanted to accept right there, but remembering past experiences, he calmed his mind and asked, "What would that thing be, Mr. Chaplain?" "Be mine." At Adrian's words, Nathan and Sasha couldn't help but stare at the redhead in shock and with their mouths hanging. A slight blush started to creep up Nathan's neck as he coughed from choking on his saliva, while Sasha was as red as a tomato and was covering her face with her hands. They had not thought that Mr. Chaplain had that kind of taste. Given the duo's reaction, a vein jumped slightly on his forehead and he couldn't help but insult their dirty mind. "Be my subordinates from now on and I will protect you from that storm." At Adrian's words, Nathan and Sasha blushed again because they misinterpreted the redhead's words, so coughing again to recover, Nathan looked at the redhead seriously. "You want us to become your subordinates?" "Yes, and if you do, you will not only receive my protection, but you will not have to worry about the following formulas of your paths." Adrian knew all the formulas and rituals of the seer pathway and also knew a way to get the formulas up to sequence 5 of the warrior's path. After all, there was a father in need of help. At the redhead's words, Nathan and Sasha couldn't help but open their eyes in surprise. "Wasn't this too good? Of course, I don't expect you to give me an answer now, so I'll give you 2 days to think about it. If you accept, come here on Friday of this week at 9 a.m. and if you don't like the deal, just don't come." After saying that, Adrian began to drink his glass of water calmly while watching the duo's reactions. Nathan and Sasha looked at each other and nodded. After that, Sasha grabbed her glass of water and drank it all in one gulp, while Nathan drank the little water that was left in the glass and placed it on the table. After doing that, Nathan and Sasha calmly got up from their chairs. "Thank you very much for receiving us tonight, Mr. Chaplain, and we will give you an answer soon. Have a good night." Good evening, Mr. Chaplain. When they said that, Adrian nodded, and placing the glass on the table, he also got up and walked them to his door. Watching how their backs were moving away, the redhead closed his door and couldn't help but sigh again, so he went to his room to finally rest. Finally, Thursday the 22nd had arrived, where Adrian would meet with his buyer to deliver the documents, but before that, there were still more than 12 hours left for that meeting and he planned to ask for more money. Sighing again, the redhead went to the hunting club where he ran into Robert who, as always, was reading. Greeting the blonde, Robert told him that Isaac, Charles, and Victor were busy preparing for the party at the end of the month but that Mr. Grievous was present and he was upstairs having some wine. At this Adrian thanked him and quickly went upstairs to meet with his shooting teacher and now superior. Being up there, he managed to see how Grievous was drinking, only turning his back on him. Adrian smiled and approached and sat next to him. Looks like you got divorced, Mr. Grievous. At Adrian's greeting, Grievous simply gave a loud laugh as he gulped down the wine in his glass. Brad, if I had gotten divorced I would be celebrating. I think your wife would celebrate harder then. When he said that, Adrian and Grievous looked at each other for a moment before laughing out loud. Grievous grabbed a glass and placed it in front of Adrian and poured him a drink and refilled his own. The redhead grabbed the glass and clinked it against Grievous's and drank it. It's good to see you again, Brat. Tell me how our class is going. I think I will survive. Laughing at that, Grievous patted the red-eyed man on the back. It's good that you get along with Isengar. He's a good teacher but sometimes he can be a bit difficult. Although from what he told me I don't think his classes are difficult for you, discovering the acting method at such an early age is undoubtedly impressive, let alone your digestion speed. Nodding at Grievous, the redhead simply looked at him and this made the bald man sigh when he saw his red eyes. Although it's not uncommon for changes to appear in the digestion of potions, it was hard for me to believe that your change would be so obvious, although believe me those eyes look much better on you. Nodding to Grievous, the redhead drank another bit of his wine and spoke again. Tell me, Mr. Grievous, what have you been doing all these days? Tell me, Mr. Grievous, what have you been doing all these days? Grievous simply gave a sarcastic laugh as he took another sip from his glass. He then began to look at the wine in it. It's been a busy week, to be honest, Brat. I doubt you know but a building caught fire and collapsed. I'm sure you'll say that's not weird but the problem is that building was the base of a gang. Adrian simply began to calmly drink from his glass and did not decide to speak for fear that he would reveal himself. Seeing that the redhead didn't respond, Grievous simply shook his head. This gang was also special. They were believers of an evil god and during one of their rituals something went wrong and ended in the death of all the members. All except a masked stranger who escaped using a shadow-related ability. Adrian now looked at Grievous in surprise. The Punishers of the Lord of Storm's church were supposed to be in charge of that event, but why then did Grievous know about this? Adrian's reaction made Grievous laugh again and he misunderstood the reason for the reaction. Ha ha ha, that face of yours is so funny and now with your new eyes it's even funnier, ha ha ha. If you want, I'll give you the recipe to have them, old bastard. Adrian's eyebrow trembled slightly as he drank another bit of wine. The Punishers originally took it upon themselves to keep this hidden and the biggest reason I knew anything is because I'm a good friend of the team captain who ran into the masked man. According to him, the masked man was quite injured and barely managed to escape, but when they checked all the remains of the fire they found a carnage and horribly mutated bodies. That was one of the reasons why they decided to keep this hidden, but when they checked and what they found later forced them to reveal information to the other churches. Originally it was thought that the reason for what happened was due to a failed ritual performed by the head of the blood mark, but it turned out that the true creator used the statue that was revered as a mark to transfer his power, and because he sent too much power to that statue caused this one to be destroyed. Because of all that power, all the people who were inside died or others mutated so much that they fused, creating a horrible monster. Saying that, Grievous raised his hand with a clenched fist but kept one finger up. Everyone died except the masked man. When he said that, he lowered his hand and went back to drink more wine. Because of this discovery they were forced to ask to notify the other churches and they asked for reinforcements to help. This is not the juiciest part, Brat. When the Church of the Goddess of Evernight and the God of Steam and Machinery sent the Nighthawks and the Machinery Hivemind respectively, something very funny happened. Taking another sip of the wine, Grievous couldn't help but let out a loud laugh at the memory. The captain of the machinery hivemind team brought a sealed artifact. It is a mirror that answers your questions that, in exchange for the answer, will require a punishment or to answer a question. The catch is that to use it you have to be surrounded by people. When the captain used the mirror to see what happened, they managed to see all the progress from how the statue broke until the building collapsed. The question the captain had to answer was if he ever wanted two teammates to grab him and do whatever they wanted to him. PSSSHAHAHAHAHAHAHAHAHA. Grievous didn't hold back anymore and burst out laughing, and Adrian did too because he already had an idea of who he was and would have loved to see poor Mr. Red Underwear's reaction. When they calmed down a bit, Grievous continued counting. The captain chose to punish, and a somewhat strong ray came out of the mirror and hit him, leaving him with his hair standing and a face covered in smoke. When he said that, he let out another laugh, but this one was a little more forced. Adrian noticed this and placed a hand on his shoulder. Grievous nodded and after taking another sip of wine continued counting. But there was a problem in what the mirror showed, and that was that at no time did it show the masked man, and the punishers noticed and claimed that. Because of that, the captain who had been punished offered them the mirror to ask. My friend decided to be the one to ask the question. When he asked the mirror what the identity of the masked man was, the mirror simply remained silent. It did not show any image or any answer, and neither did it ask for the answer to a question, nor did it punish. He thought it had broken, so he demanded an answer from the captain, but he also didn't know what was happening because according to him it was the first time something like this had happened. Grievous drank the last of the wine from his glass and placed it on the table, then turned to face Adrian. They failed to get any kind of information about this man, as if he never existed. Grievous's tone had turned dark and dangerous, and even Adrian, who was the man they were looking for, was quite surprised. Even with Klein, the mirror arrows showed at most his shadow, but now it didn't even dare to look at him. What was supposed to be the meaning of that? Quickly feeling that he shouldn't keep thinking about this, Adrian tried to change the topic of conversation. That sure is creepy, but Mr. Grievous, are you sure it's a good idea to talk about all of this in here? At the question, Grievous smiled and took out a watch from his pocket. The pocket watch that Grievous took out was quite a beautiful normal-sized one. It seemed to be made of matte black metal and silver details on the front. When he showed it, Grievous opened it as well, allowing Adrian to see that the clock's hands were a wine-like burgundy color and its numbers were a rusty color. Adrian was quite surprised and couldn't help but give Grievous a rare look. Is this what I think it is, Mr. Grievous? Yes, brat, this is a sealed artifact. Its serial number is 2-63, but I preferred to call it hangover time. Adrian raised an eyebrow at Grievous's naming ability. Although he couldn't judge him too much either, he still had the burnt band in his pocket. So he looked curiously at the pocket watch in Grievous's hands. What are the abilities of this watch? It has two quite useful abilities. If you turn the crown of the watch to the left, you can use an ability called distortion. By distorting the target's words, actions, and intent, can formulate a certain order that provided an advantage, so as to achieve the goal of restraining and influencing their opponent. If I turn the crown to the right, I can use the last one being disorder. I can make the target or a specific location disordered, such that enemies will easily make mistakes with their attacks, making them difficult to land, or in this case disorder where we talk. When he said that, he closed the watch again and put it in his pocket to drink more wine later. Adrian was quite surprised by the abilities of this artifact. If he was not mistaken, it should be made with the characteristics of Sequence 5 Mentor of the Disorder of the Path of the Black Emperor. But then what would be the negative effects of using this artifact? Hee. Grievous gave a small laugh as he drank some more wine. It has two negative effects. The first would be that every time you use one of the two abilities of this watch, some perception of yours will be disordered for 5 hours. An example would be your sexuality, and you will also want to drink a large amount of wine. When he said that, he went back to drink more wine, but he choked. Seeing this, Adrian simply shook his head and slapped Grievous on the back, causing him to help him. How did you get this artifact, Mr. Grievous? While asking this, Grievous cursed him between coughs, but after calming down he began to think. It was quite a while ago, if I'm being honest, although I can remember buying it for £13,000 from a friend in Byam. You were in Byam, brat, there's a lot you don't know about me. Smiling at Grievous's words, the redhead shook his head as he drank the last of his wine. Getting up from his place, Adrian said goodbye to his ex-shooting teacher. After going down the stairs he tried to say goodbye to Robert but he stopped him. Adrian, wait, I was wondering if you were free on Sunday. Raising an eyebrow at this question, Adrian thought about his calendar and he was a little free in the afternoon, so he told the blonde. Perfect then, would you like to come to my house for dinner? Ads by PubFuture. Taking him off guard, Adrian was quite surprised. He didn't expect Robert to have that confidence, but it didn't bother him that much, so he answered him smiling. I'm free, so I'll be waiting for Sunday, Robert. I would love to keep talking to you, but I have things to do, so take care of yourself. Robert showed a big smile and didn't give much importance to the fact that Adrian had to leave, so he dismissed him and continued to drink tea calmly. Adrian was now at home eating while thinking about how to get the formula for Sequence 7. The potion should be digested no later than the first week of July, so he had to think about how to get the formula, but he would also have to look for the ingredients. It was quite likely that he had no choice but to accumulate contribution points with the church until they gave him the formula. After all, formulas of Sequence 7 were already hard to come by. Although that could take a long time. Leaving that aside, he began to think about Robert's invitation to dinner, and he couldn't help but let out a small laugh. He was undoubtedly someone very nice, and perhaps in the future Adrian would invite him to eat in a restaurant, although it would not be soon. After all, he still had a broken rib and the effects of the potion were still going strong, so he could only stay with Robert for dinner, but he would have to leave early because he would have to eat more than the blonde could cook. Regretting that, Adrian finished his meal, and picking up the documents from under the table in his closet, put on his mask and cloak. Sighing, he also put on the burnt band to use shadow leaps to get to the bar unnoticed. After arriving with the secretary to deliver the documents, he told him that the person would be waiting for him in a room next door. Nodding to that, Adrian went back out and went to the room and entered. There was not much to say about the room. It was only a table and 2 chairs, and in one of these, there was a figure covered in a tunic, not allowing him to see any detail. This figure placed the money on the table, and Adrian could see that the person had delicate hands with red pedicures. When Adrian saw the hand, he had a sudden urge to kneel and kiss it. This desire arose quite quickly, and the redhead bit his tongue to get out of that light trance of adoration. A horror rose in his heart at this reaction as under his coat he prepared to put on the burnt band. Shit, why now? Adrian's thoughts had become unruly, but knowing that he couldn't stand still all day, he approached with calm steps but a heavy heart and placed the documents on the table while he took the money. He quickly counted them, verifying that all the 80 pounds were there, but he did not dare to ask for more money for fear of how this witch might react. He never lost sight of the witch while he counted the money, which allowed him to see how she began to read the documents, and the simple act of moving the papers had a sensual air that was difficult to ignore, so biting his tongue again, he made a slight bow to this witch. A pleasure doing business with you. When he said that, he turned around and quickly left the room. When the woman was alone, she lowered the hood of her robe, allowing one to see her very beautiful face. Beautiful blonde hair cascaded to below her shoulders, accompanied by emerald green eyes that looked gentle, and her lips were full and ruby red. Now a soft smile began to form on her beautiful lips as she looked at the room door. She had originally planned to kill the one who brought her the information here, but a reminder of her spirituality made her stop. Apparently, this man was not simple. While the woman kept that smile, she didn't realize that in a window behind her, there was the reflection of another blonde woman who kept her blue eyes on the blonde at all times. When Adrian came out, the first thing he did was quickly put on the burnt sash, and he quickly did several shadow jumps to get as fast as possible from the bar. When he completed the 5th, he took off the burned sash to save spirituality and began to move quickly between the alleys and roofs. When he got home, the redhead checked all his traps, and seeing that none of them were active or tampered with, he didn't even feel relieved but instead set up a few more traps while keeping the revolver in his hands. He set up a minefield inside his house and kept watch all night for fear that the witch would come to visit him. The red moon hung high in the sky while Adrian was hiding on the roof waiting. This is how the hours went by, and the red moon fell and the sun rose and morning came, but at no time were there traces of the witch. Sighing slightly, the redhead went down from the roof where he was hiding, and still, with a revolver in hand, he went to the kitchen to prepare something. He hadn't had any dinner and now he was deathly hungry and his body was overheating. This time the amount of food he made for himself would be able to feed a family of 7 adult men of 2.00 meters without a problem. He ate for 2 hours and when he finished it was 7 a.m. and he was caressing his jaw. It hurt from chewing so much and now he was wondering if after all this he would have to see a dentist. Sighing, the redhead drank a lukewarm coffee so that the food would go down well. Knowing that it wouldn't be long, the redhead grabbed a piece of paper and wrote a formula on it while he waited for 9 a.m. to arrive. While sitting he crossed his legs and rested his cheek on his left fist as he tapped rhythmically on the table in front of him and hummed a song under his breath. This time it was a song that he listened to throughout his childhood and always listened to when he felt down. Time passes. And the memories. They are moving away now. We were angels. And from heaven. We gave seeds of love. His voice was soft as he sang and he let memories of a better time come to his head. He did not dare to sing it in Spanish because he did not know what could happen, so he could only sing it in Loan. So he continued quietly singing an opening from his childhood of an anime that he always saw with his younger brother in their small bedroom from a classic square TV, but now he was singing it alone in a house that did not have the warmth of home, and with no one to accompany him. It went on like this until 9 a.m. finally arrived and someone knocked on the door of his house. Realizing that he was lost in the song, Adrian got up from the chair but felt his face wet as he raised a hand to his face. Adrian felt the tears that fell from his eyes and simply let out an empty laugh. Wiping away the tears with his hand, he calmly went to the door and opened it, allowing him to see a very tall woman and a man with blue eyes. Smiling at them, Adrian moved and allowed them entry into his home. Nathan and Sasha looked at each other and with a sigh, they calmly entered the house while Adrian closed the door. They arrived at the living room and seated in some armchairs. Nathan was the first to speak. "We accept the deal, Mr. Chaplin," Nathan's pav. "We accept the deal, Mr. Chaplin." When he said that, he felt the weight that had fallen back in the last 2 days that had passed. He could still remember how he spent hours talking with Sasha to make this decision, but he also used various divination methods, but all of them fail again. So the only thing he could trust was his intuition as a seer to finally make the decision. And now, seeing Mr. Chaplin sitting in front of him with a small smile and with his eyes slightly closed, he couldn't help but swallow a little saliva. He watched as Chaplin got up from his chair and extended his hand to them while having a sharp smile. "Welcome aboard, Nathan and Sasha." He also got up and grabbed the redhead's hand and shook it slightly, and Sasha also did the same thing, only a little stronger. After that, Mr. Chaplin sat down again and took a piece of paper out of his pocket and began to play with it. "Where are you living now? Is it safe?" Not expecting the question, he fell silent and began to think. That house was chosen by him after numerous divinations and inspirations, and it was house number 6 that they tried when he finally decided. Taking that into account, the black-haired man nodded and answered. "It's pretty safe apart from having numerous places to escape in case of discovery." "How well are you financially?" Faced with another question, he couldn't help but scratch his neck slightly as he did some mental math. "We're good, we've been doing various jobs so we have a decent amount of money saved." When he said that, he saw how Chaplin nodded as he placed the paper on the table and threw it towards him. "You can say that this is my investment as a leader. Sorry, Sasha, but you will have to wait a little longer." Not understanding what he meant, he grabbed the paper and turned it over, and when he saw the title he couldn't believe what was on it. Sequence 8. Clown. Main materials. A crystal of the single horn of a mature Hornassus gray mountain goat. A complete stalk of a human-faced rose. This is. Due to the surprise, Nathan couldn't help but drop the paper and get up from his chair. At this, Sasha looked at him with surprise, and you could tell by her expression that she was wondering what was written on it. Recovering quickly, Nathan took a coin out of his pocket and after repeating something 7 times in his head, he tossed it and let it fall into his hand. Seeing the result, he couldn't help but look with surprise at the man in front of him who, after seeing what he did, gave a nod of approval. "This is my investment towards you, but it is in your hands to get the ingredients, and as I said, Sasha will have to wait a little longer." Sasha wasn't stupid, because when she heard about the part of ingredients, she couldn't help but look at Mr. Chaplin with doubt. After that, she also gave him a look to make sure it was true. At this, he nodded and he could see how Sasha put a hand on her forehead while she muttered in a low voice. "Mr. Chaplin, are you sure about this?" "I'm sure. After all, I have to feed my puppies so they grow big and strong." Are we puppies in your eyes? The corners of Nathan's mouth quivered while on Sasha's forehead, a pulsing vein popped out. At this, Mr. Chaplin simply gave a light laugh as he tried to cover his mouth with his hand, but his red eyes shone with amusement. Giving a calming sigh, he simply looked back at the formula in his hands and then put it inside a pocket in his shirt. We will be under your care, Mr. Chap. Adrian. Being interrupted in the middle of his sentence again, his mouth wanted to tremble, but this time he was also confused. Adrian. It's my real name. He and Sasha let out the same sound while also having stupid expressions on their faces at the redhead's amused eyes. Did you really think I would tell strangers my real name? Quote. He and Sasha fell silent as a vein popped in their foreheads and they clenched their fists tightly as the now Mr. Adrian chuckled as his red eyes sparkled with even more amusement. You will learn, don't worry about it, as long as you remember that you don't have to say your names to strangers, you'll be fine. Now more veins popped on their foreheads as their mouths trembled hard, now they felt like he was definitely treating them like children. I hope you can promote yourself before the end of the month, but tell me, do you have where to buy the ingredients? At Mr. Adrian's question and wanting to change the subject, he nodded and replied. We know of several parties where we can try our luck. At his words, he watched as Mr. Adrian nodded before adding something. I recommend you not to buy all the ingredients at the same party because it may attract attention from the secret order. At this advice, he couldn't help but feel a slight chill go up his spine as he nodded to the redhead's words. Seeing that he had been heard, Mr. Adrian nodded before turning his attention to Sasha. Your sequence 8 formula may take some time to get, so you'll have to be patient. At the redhead's words, Sasha was still a little annoyed but still nodded. I'll be waiting for news from you, boss. At the new nickname, Mr. Adrian simply smiled. It's been a few hours since Nathan and Shasa left Adrian's house and he was on Rose Street right now. Harvest Church. Being someone who wanted to be an architect, Adrian couldn't help but stand outside and admire the beauty of the church. Klein's description did it enough justice, but it was certainly much more beautiful to see it in person. The only thing he could complain about would be the size, but remembering how the belief towards Earth Mother was quite criticized, he could understand it. Although I also expected it to have more green, but I won't comment on that. As he had thought of that, Klein's description did it enough justice. Being a small cathedral, the Golden Cathedral had a striking steeple and a sacred emblem of life engraved on its facade. It was a baby surrounded by the symbols of wheat, flowers, and spring water. The emblem made a difference from the surrounding buildings. If I remembered correctly, according to Klein, in the afternoon there were not many devotees and the father would be alone. Sensing that he had already been standing in front of the cathedral for a long time, he fixed any imperfections in his clothing and adjusted his medium-height black silk hat. At this point, father's problem was still attacking him and he had no intention of provoking him since he didn't want to have to suffer his wrath. This was the first time he was going to enter a church since he woke up, and because he used to be a Christian, out of respect for the church and fear of the father's reaction, he left the burnt band at home. After he was sure that everything was in order, the redhead sighed and calmly entered the interior of the cathedral. In the hall of the cathedral, rows of pews were arranged neatly. Right at the top, at the front, there was a large sacred emblem of life where candles were lit on both sides of its altar, and rows of candles lined the left and right walls of the hall. The candle stands are silver and there is a confessional. Looking around him, he could see that only 3 people were praying inside, and that was including the father. Ads by PubFuture. The father was at the front pew praying, sitting with his eyes closed. He was a tall man in his 40s or 50s wearing a brown clergyman's attire and a bishop's bonnet. He was like a small mountain even sitting, giving off an extremely oppressive feeling. His eyebrows were light and thin. There were obvious wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, his cheeks, and the corners of his mouth. It's like being in the presence of Thor. Grabbing his hat, he took it off and placed it on his chest as he sat in the middle while copying the devotee's prayer posture. He put his hands in front of his mouth and nose, with fingers interlocked and empty palms. As time passed, the few people who were praying left the cathedral until only Adrian and the father remained. It's time. Sighing to calm down, Adrian got up calmly and still had his hat in his hands. He moved closer to the front and sat on the corner of the bench while he watched the father, who continued to pray. He was in no hurry, so he calmly waited for him to finish praying, and while that was happening he began to review how he was going to request the formula. After an hour, the father finally opened his eyes and stopped praying and then turned his gaze to Adrian, who was waiting. Within his pale blue eyes there seemed to be an internal conflict and grief that was hardly contained. Sorry for the inconvenience, father. Let me introduce myself. I am Adrian Kenway. Welcome, child. I am Father Utravsky, and this should be your first time attending, so tell me what bothers your heart. His voice, despite being a bit strong, still had a remarkable gentleness that Adrian couldn't help but compare to that of a grandfather speaking to his grandson. This made his heart, which was somewhat agitated, manage to calm down, and giving a slight bow he made his request. Ads by PubFuture. Sorry for the inconvenience, Father Utravsky, but I would like to buy pugilist's formula from you. Quote. The grandfather-like man heaved a heavy sigh that made the muscles under his brown clothes bulge slightly, and Adrian's face paled as he thought he had unintentionally provoked the man. But the redhead's fears were not fulfilled, since after that powerful sigh the father looked at him from head to toe while raising an eyebrow. I'm not sure how you found out about me, but tell me, child, what do you need it for? I have a teammate who requires the formula to be able to combat a great danger, and promotion would be able to help us. Adrian gave a summary answer of his situation while Father Utravsky listened attentively. After hearing the answer, the father closed his eyes for a while he thought about his answer. I have no problem giving you the formula, but in return, your teammate will have to come to serve in the cathedral for 4 months. The redhead couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief because of this. He almost thought that Father Utravsky would ask him to fight his dark side, but that didn't happen. He would have to discuss it with Sasha, but there shouldn't be too much of a problem, so nodding to Father Utravsky he bowed. I will give you an answer in a few days, father. Thank you very much for your time, and may Earth Mother bless you. At his words, Father Utravsky let out a warm smile as he closed his eyes and made the same prayer posture. Bless you, child. Adrian, after that talk he had with Father Utravsky, he had left the cathedral and was now on his way home. As the buildings passed like the time, he began to think about how to break the news to Sasha. If he was honest, it had been solved quite quickly, and now he only needed the acceptance of the warrior, but he didn't think about telling her the news yet. If he wasn't wrong, Nathan and Sasha should now be busy trying to get the ingredients for the clown potion, so it was hard for them to be at their house. It would also be very strange that when he asked them for time to get the formula, he couldn't go visit them to tell them that he had already gotten it just a few hours later. So he decided to visit them on Monday afternoon, or have them visit him on their own, whichever comes first. He had already told them about the days he was available and the hours he was at home, and the duo did the same. They also told him where they lived to visit them in case of anything. So with all that taken care of, the redhead simply began to whistle as he continued on his way home while looking at the always cloudy sky of Backland. He continued like this until he managed to get to his house, and after checking the traps he went and lifted a wooden plank from the hallway and took out a container from it. Replacing the wooden plank, he released the wall of spirituality and opened the container, removing the burnt band from it. With the burnt band in his hands, he felt safer, and while he scratched his neck he went to the kitchen to make himself a good lunch. While he ate, he couldn't help thinking that after today's dinner, he would have to go out tomorrow to buy more vegetables, meat, milk, bread, eggs, coffee, etc. Sighing, he simply lightly touched the rib that was still broken but was much better than a few days ago. The potions were without a doubt too convenient in being able to heal a broken bone in just 2 weeks. With the best modern medicine in the modern world, it would take a long time for a bone to heal if it did so in the first place. Thanks again, Marich. Thanking Mr. Zombie, he continued eating calmly and let his mind wander. After healing, no doubt it would take him a while to get used to his usual amount of food again, but he could also concentrate on digesting what was left of the potion. Thinking about digestion, the notary contract prevents me from sharing the acting method, but there is a crack in it. It never prevents me from making those I raised discover it on their own, for example making Sasha join a fight club, in addition to the fact that the contract was not made by a real notary, so maybe when my sequence is higher, I can break it by force. With all this said, Adrian reached for his favorite black mug and drank some coffee. The somewhat bitter taste of his coffee made his mind travel, and he remembered that he had not eaten something sweet for a long time. He also started thinking about chocolate ice cream, but his mind drifted a bit until he thought about mint ice cream, and a certain baby snake entered his head. Thinking of the president of the Life School of Thought, the redhead thought if it would be a good idea to try to contact him and form a relationship in this run of his while he was still Ausepton, but decided to leave that for when he was sequence 7 or 6. Being an archangel of sequence 1 of the path of destiny, the fact that he did not run into him should have a motive or reason, or perhaps it was not the right time yet. Leaving the subject of baby snakes aside, he decided to return to thinking about ice cream, and then that turned to milkshakes. I wonder if there are milkshakes right now. If ice cream is possible, shouldn't it also be milkshakes? Setting his mug on the table, Adrian thought some more and decided it wouldn't be a bad idea to try to find it tomorrow. After all, I'll be a little disappointed that Russell didn't invent it. It would be a wasted opportunity on his part, besides is not hard to make. After insulting Russell a bit, the redhead finished his buffet, and seeing that he didn't have many things to do, he simply went to his room and returned to grab a book with a familiar blue cover from his nightstand. He was always reading this book whenever he had the time or was very bored. Furs was undoubtedly a very good writer, and he couldn't wait to read the horror stories of a certain crazy hunter in the future. Thinking of Furs, Adrian inevitably also thought of Zio, and remembering their situation, the redhead couldn't help but worry. Furs knew too much right now, and he wasn't sure if she would be able to last until October, so it is very likely that he will have to help her get the formula for Trickster. The best way to resist the cries for help of Mr. Door would be for her to be stronger, and this would be the best option for her survival. But that would have to wait a little longer. Barely a week had passed since what happened in the alley, and the wound was still somewhat open. I better wait until the second week of July, that would be the best. As he flipped through the book, he couldn't help but think of something and shake his head in a bit of amusement. The answer again was still to wait. Adrian, after a heavy breakfast, had left on his way to Isengar's house for his last class of the week. While in class, Adrian noticed how from time to time Isengar massaged his forehead while giving his classes, and although that was the most he could notice, after all, he was not the audience to discover abnormalities in people's behavior. As Isengar had promised on Monday, they would start Ancient Hermes next week. And so the class ended, but contrary to what Adrian expected, that Isengar could not stay and have tea, he did stay. Right now they were each with a cup of tea in hand, but Isengar was not so focused on the tea but rather on something in his head. "Teacher, is everything all right?" At Adrian's question, Isengar took out his pipe from his suit, and after loading it with tobacco, he lit it and inhaled a little before answering. "Adrian, you know that the relationship between the Church of the Lord of the Storm and the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom is very bad, right?" Adrian nodded to Isengar's question, showing that he knew that he nodded before continuing. "You must be careful with the punishers from the Church of the Lord of Storms, because if they arrest you and discover you are from our church, they will treat you as an illegal who has committed horrible acts despite being innocent. Being imprisoned to be experimented on would be your only fate. Unlike the Church of the Evernight Goddess, that the most they will do are send you back to Lindbergh, where our church headquarters are located." At this, Adrian's eyes widened slightly before slowly nodding to Isengar's words. He originally thought that since he was now part of the official forces, he wouldn't have to worry about the other officials. But now it turns out that his decision to escape the punishers that Sunday was the right one. That was a stroke of luck. A cold sweat ran down his back, so he couldn't help but shiver slightly. That's why you don't have to interact in any way with the punishers, because the chance of getting caught will be increased. In case of being involved in extraordinary events, the best thing you can do is divert that attention by saying that you believe in another deity, so the forces of that church deal with it. It goes without saying that any of Backlund's official beliefs are fine, of course, just don't say the Lord of Storms. The more Isengar talked, Adrian couldn't help but feel that something was very wrong, so he decided to express his doubt. "Professor, everything you are telling me is very useful, but what is the reason for this?" Isengar simply sighed heavily as he took another deep draw on his pipe as he looked into his eyes. "This last week the police have been asking me for a lot of help for cases that they could not solve, and that is very rare. You should know that the police here hate private detectives. Every time I go to investigate, I always end up finding some clues relating to activity from different witches all over the East Borough." Adrian swallowed again. This was something he already knew, but he didn't think it had gotten to such a point. "The increase in extraordinary events in Backlund makes us in danger of being discovered. That's why I told you this." My biggest advice is to avoid at all costs being in large extraordinary events because you are going to get arrested and there will be nothing that grievous or I can do to help, the same goes for him and me. So if the day comes that one of the three is discovered and arrested by the punishers, all the members of the church that the arrested person has known will have no choice but to leave Backland. Hey, don't put the death flag on us, old man, thought the redhead thought with a quivering eyebrow as he looked at the ground with a heavy face. At Adrian's expression, Isengar could only sigh as he took another puff on his pipe. Don't worry, my student, this information is just to remind you, you should know that the probability that you will find yourself in an event of that size is very small. Why did you have to say that? Adrian's eyebrow twitched as he looked at Isengar with some annoyance. The detective was quite confused when he saw his student's reaction. Had he said something wrong? Thank you very much for the tea in the class today, as always, teacher. I'll see you on Monday. Of course, see you on Monday, Adrian. Coming out of his stupor, Isengar got up and called his servant so he could accompany the redhead while he went to his office to continue reviewing documents related to other cases. Outside the house, and after saying goodbye to Isengar's servant, Adrian sighed again as he took a public carriage on the way to the market. He still had to buy many things and the market closed at 5 p.m., and now it was 3 p.m. After arriving at the market and managing to buy enough to last him for the week that remained of his treatment, he began to calmly leave the market area. After 20 minutes of leaving the market area, a family of three entered the market. The father was a middle-aged man whose blonde hair already had some white hair. The mother was a pretty woman who, despite having some wrinkles, still maintained a young appearance. And the son, despite being very young, had a strong appearance in his father's blonde hair and pitch-black eyes. Darling, this is the last time that I listen to you in taking directions. How is it possible that you still get confused? Sweetheart, I told you, I don't know what happened, I promise you it was to the right, but I don't know how we got lost. Anyway, at least we managed to get to the market on time. While they were arguing slightly, the boy who was still holding his mother's hand looked around curiously but then shook his shoulders and looked at his mother with his big eyes. Mom, can I have some ice cream? The little argument stopped and the father and mother looked fondly at their son while the woman patted his head. Will, you can't always be eating ice cream, it's not good for your growth. At this, Will pouted. After arriving at his house, Adrian put everything he bought on the table. All this should be at least 14 kilos of food and it cost £2. This is more than the weekly food expense of a middle-class family. He still remembered the looks he received when he bought all this and the ones he received when he was on his way to his home. Sighing, Adrian put away the vegetables, milk, and meat. As he put all this away, he couldn't help but think about the dinner he would have tomorrow with Robert. That should be considered a date, right? He had never had a date with a girl in his past life, not to mention with a man. He didn't consider himself gay or anything like that, but this may be a good idea to get to know the blonde better. Robert was a nice person and had a slight air about him that he couldn't deny he was attracted to, and since he wanted to have a better relationship with him, he couldn't come to dinner empty-handed, so he had to think about what to bring. While eating an apple to lighten his taste a bit, he tried to think of a gift. Robert was someone who was a big fan of Furz's books, but he didn't know if she had written another one at this point. Considering the future, then she would only write more when she arrived at the Tarot Club. He had to scrap the idea of a signed copy because the relationship between her and him at this point was bad, even a little hostile. Sighing, the redhead finished eating his apple and threw the core of it into the trash can. When he grabbed the second apple to eat, an idea hit his head and he put the apple away again. Moving down the aisle, the redhead grabbed his mid-height silk hat as he headed out to a pastry shop. Arriving at one that wasn't too far from the market area, Adrian entered and a bell rang as he opened the door. A slightly older lady came out from behind the counter. She had warm air around her, she was wearing glasses, and her white hair was well groomed. If one were to compare her to someone, it would be Muriel from the cartoon Courage. What would you like, sweetheart? Good afternoon, ma'am. I was wondering if you made orders, since I would like to order a cake for tomorrow. The redhead gave a small smile to the lady as he took off his hat and placed it on his chest as his voice was soft. Yes, we do it, sweetheart. You can tell me what you would like. We also have a list of what we offer if you are unsure. When she said that, she handed him a pamphlet from under the counter and he grabbed it. There were plenty of options from chocolate cakes to vanilla, strawberry, cheesecake, and lemon pies. While he was reading this pamphlet calmly and trying to think about what would be the best option to order, the store bell rang again. The redhead couldn't care less who had entered, so he just kept reading, but a sweet woman's perfume reached his sensitive nose. Turning his gaze to the entrance, he could see a woman with an exotic air and a flirtatious look with beautiful black hair that fell down her back and green eyes. "Welcome back, Selena. Same as always, dear. Please, Granny Jenny, along with the usual cookies." The one called Selena just gave him a small look before returning her gaze to Jenny as she appeared to grab a lemon pie and place it in a pink box while grabbing a small bag decorated with a ribbon bench and handing it to her. "My dear, how is the family?" "The same as always, Granny. It's just that my sister continues with her usual strange hobbies." They continued chatting while ignoring the redhead, who was standing to one side, somewhat frozen with a slightly slack mouth. "It would be one soli and two penny, dear. Here you have, Granny Jenny." Paying the call, Selena first grabbed the bag with the white ribbon and opened it, took out a cookie with white chocolate chips, put it in her mouth, and began to eat slowly. After doing that, she closed the bag and grabbed the pink box and started to head for the exit, but seeing Adrian's goofy expression, she giggled as she gave him a flirtatious wink and left the store. Adrian continued to be somewhat dazed by the woman, but it wasn't because she was extremely beautiful, but because she seemed like the perfect copy of Yennefer from the Witcher game. "Have you made up your mind yet, sweetie?" Jenny's voice took him out of his state, and when he noticed that he was still looking at the door, he returned his gaze to the woman. She had a slight smile at the same time with a raised eyebrow along with an amused look. Adrian didn't care much about that and let out a small laugh as he went back to the counter. "I would like an apple pie, and I will come to pick it up tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. "Of course, sweetheart, that would be one soli with 3 pennies, and if you feel like something sweet you can always come with Grandma Jenny." Nodding at Grandma Jenny, Adrian paid and received the receipt to pick up his order and left the bakery. The flesh and blood appearance of such a familiar video game character had still left an impact on him, although the red pedicure she had gave it a special touch. Shaking his head, the redhead simply walked calmly towards his house while whistling the theme of Geralt of Rivia. Adrian was finishing his breakfast right now and he was looking at the clock in the kitchen. Right now it was 8 a.m. on Sunday, June 25th. In 10 hours he would have dinner with Robert, and he was a little nervous, if he was honest. But that was not the important thing now, but that he had to go to the club due to a small problem. Robert hadn't told him where he lived, which brings a lot of problems, but that was easy to solve because the blonde was always at the club no matter what time it was. Although if he was being honest, it was a bit of an exaggeration that the club was open every day and Robert was always working. But this is Backland, so this exploitation was something normal. It seemed that the blonde was not affected at all by those extra hours. Shaking his head, Adrian fixed his hair and put his hat back on, and left his house. Before arriving at the club, Adrian went to buy another newspaper from a boy, folding it and tucking it under his right arm to read later as he got into a public carriage. He was buying several newspapers because he was trying to find the traces of the witches, but these last few days nothing had happened. Which left him a bit anxious. These witches were making so much noise only to just disappear like that. After all the noise they made in the East Borough and the weird deaths they'd been going through this whole month, it was just too weird for them to just stop. Did they attract more attention from the churches than they could bear and escape? That couldn't be possible. They couldn't be so careless in Backland of all places. This was too weird. They didn't just act like that. Most likely they were planning something big, and that's why they were keeping a lower profile. What didn't make the situation any better? Looking out the window, he gazed at the ever-cloudy Backland sky while letting his mind wander a bit. The Monday of the next week I should be healed and I will be able to act without having to worry about not being able to defend myself properly. While thinking that, he discreetly rubbed the area of his ribs. The bone was not far from being completely healed. After a while, he got out of the carriage and after paying the driver he entered the club. As always, Robert was behind the desk and was reading, but he was more attentive than usual and looked up and saw him. Smiling, he put away whatever he's been reading and waved to him. Adrian could see that he had cut his hair and it was quite elegant. It seems that he is not the only one who is somewhat nervous today. "Good morning, Adrian. It's quite rare that you come on Sundays. I hope it's not to cancel tonight's dinner." A mischievous smile graced his face as he tapped his finger on the table. "Calm down, Robert. My tastes aren't that bad. it's just that you never told me where you live. Robert's smile turned a little forced before he rubbed his forehead. Sorry, Adrian, I hadn't noticed. No problem, I'm sure you've been a little stressed these last few days, that's why you didn't notice. You're right, maybe that's it, it's been a bit of a heavy few days, my mind is everywhere. Sorry again and thanks for taking the trouble to come by. That's what friends are for. A calm seemed to envelop the blonde as he nodded to the redhead. I live at 19 Peter Street in Sherwood Borough in a rented house, it's quite conspicuous so you shouldn't have a problem picking it out. The redhead nodded and memorized the address as he watched Robert get up. I'm going to make some tea so wait a minute. Adrian simply nodded as he sat in a chair to wait for the blonde and hummed to himself again to kill time. This time it was the melody from Undertale's Megalovania. Remembering that game he couldn't stop his mind from wandering again, he had only completed the game once and only got the pacifist ending. He was not able to kill those monsters because he could feel their life. Something that always accompanied him in any other game with endings depending on the player's actions, he always went for what he thought was the best. Something ironic being that at this point in time, he had already killed 2 people with his bare hands, and if he counted the disaster that was the red band gang that would shoot into double digits. Letting out a dry laugh, the redhead simply continued with the tune while he waited for Robert. It didn't take long and the blonde arrived while holding 2 cups of hot black tea, and passed one to the redhead as he sat next to him. The redhead took a small sip of his tea, being sequence 8 the temperature of this tea did not bother him at all but he had to maintain the appearance of a normal person in front of Robert. The taste of the tea was somewhat bitter but it did not taste bad just it was not to his liking. Adrian, a question. Do you have a family? Cough cough. Adrian began to cough hard not expecting the question at all. Looking at Robert he saw how he did not seem affected at all by his reaction and simply watched him waiting for an answer. Calming his cough, he looked at the blonde with a raised eyebrow. Why the question, Robert? Robert simply moved his shoulders slightly. Curiosity more than anything, Adrian, you don't have to answer if you don't feel comfortable. The redhead looked at the blonde for a moment before taking another sip of his tea and answering. It doesn't bother me, it just took me by surprise. Thinking about his life as Joa and then his life as Adrian, he only let out a sad smile. I am an orphan. I'm so sorry for asking, Adrian. If you feel uncomfortable we can cancel today seriously. Robert's reaction didn't take long, he was embarrassed as he tried to apologize, and this made the redhead laugh a little. Don't worry, Robert, I have been for a long time so it doesn't affect me at all. That was a lie, he was with his family only a month ago and that tortured him every day. He had the memories of Adrian who grew up an orphan but also had his life as Joa who grew up with his parents and a brother, and from one second to another he was suddenly alone. Robert didn't notice his condition and he breathed a sigh of relief. Again, sorry, Adrian. Don't worry, as I said, I'm used to it. After that awkward moment between the two of them, they continued talking for another half hour, most of which was Robert apologizing and Adrian telling him he was fine. Now it was 10 a.m. and there were still 8 hours left for dinner with Robert. Adrian right now was at his house looking at the ceiling with a somewhat cloudy look. Robert's question opened a wound in his heart that he was ignoring with each passing day and now it was bleeding again. Sighing, the redhead put his hands to his face and then screamed loudly but his hands drowned out the scream. Removing his hands from his face, the redhead continued to stare at the ceiling for another hour before hunger struck. Getting up from where he was sitting, he went to the kitchen to prepare his lunch. This time he decided to do something that his mom always did on Sundays and that was Milanese. Seasoning the meat with a little garlic, he began to beat the meat with a wooden hammer to flatten it. He then broke several eggs into a container and then mixed them vigorously until they were well blended. Then he put the seasoned meat in the egg and then took it out and wrapped it in ground bread. Heating some sunflower oil in a pan, and he deep fried all the meat. He had made mashed potatoes to accompany the Milanese. I just finished cooking at 2:30 p.m. and I put everything on the table. Looking at all the food that was on the table, he couldn't help but laugh sadly. This was the amount that the 4 of them used to eat. Shaking his head, the redhead sat down in his chair, and cutting a bit of Milanese, he put it in his mouth. Now tears began to fall from his eyes as he ate. Just like Mom did. And so he was eating between sobs while he remembered the days he spent with his family. The talks he had with his brother while they laughed at their dad's bad jokes while his mom told him how her coworkers had brought cookies for everyone and that she had brought some for them. So he was eating while the memories flooded his mind and his sobs sounded through the kitchen. After eating everything, he washed his cutlery and then went to the bathroom to wash his face. Looking at himself in the mirror, Adrian could see how his eyes were a little red and a little swollen from crying, so he sighed and washed his face again before brushing his teeth. He was in the bathroom for a while before going out and sitting back in the chair and staring at the ceiling for a long time. So 5 p.m. arrived and Adrian got up from his chair to go to the bathroom and take a shower. Leaving the shower, he went to his room to change into something elegant for dinner. After getting dressed, he looked in the mirror and saw that his eyes were no longer swollen or red. He simply nodded and left his house, heading to Grandma Jenny's pastry shop. It was already 5:30 p.m. and she picked up her order from Grandma Jenny, who told her to enjoy it. Thanking Grandma, he took a public carriage and headed for Sherwood Borough, arriving at 5:50 p.m. Right now he was at 19 Peter Street looking for the building that Robert described to him, and as the blonde had said, it was a rather striking house. The red roof made it stand out among all the others which had gray roofs, so sighing and fixing his hair and hat, he went to the door and rang the doorbell. Neither Adrian nor Robert were nobles, so he didn't have to worry that by arriving at the appointed time he would be frowned upon. And after a while, a familiar blonde man opened the door. Robert had his blonde hair neatly combed while wearing a white shirt with a brown vest. Seeing him, the blonde breathed a sigh of relief as he made his way so that he could enter, and also gave a curious look at the pink box that was in the hands of the redhead. "I really thought for a moment that you wouldn't come." Adrian gave him an amused look as he calmly walked into Robert's house. "I told you there was no problem, so let's leave this topic behind. Besides, I brought you something." When he already entered the house and Robert closed the door, he handed him the box with the cake. Robert, holding the box in his hands, opened it and his eyes sparkled. "Adrian, you didn't have. I didn't know what to bring that would be a good gift, so I decided on an apple pie. Quote. Thank you for this." Robert closed the box again and took it to his kitchen. Looking around, Adrian saw that the house was designed in a similar style to his own. The first floor had a huge living room, a well-lit dining room, 2 guest rooms, a bathroom, a wine cellar, and a kitchen that stretched all the way to the back. But he couldn't know exactly what was on the second floor. Robert carried the box to the kitchen and placed it on a small table. Adrian could see that there was a saucepan in the kitchen that gave off a good smell. Apparently, Robert made soup for dinner. As he thought so, Robert took out 2 bowls and placed them on the table. "I hope you're hungry. I made a soup following my family's recipe, and I warn you, it's a bit spicy." A smile was on Robert's face as he went to the kitchen and grabbed the saucepan to bring it to the table. With a ladle, he was serving the soup in the 2 bowls. Adrian took advantage and sat on the chair while he waited for the blonde to finish serving. Robert placed the bowls in front of Adrian and he could see the soup. The soup looked delicious with an orange color, with pieces of vegetables floating in the liquid as well as pieces of meat. "Would you like to pray to give thanks for the food?" Robert's question surprised him a bit, but he wasn't affected by it, so he answered with a smile. "I have no problem, Robert." That was what he said, but his thoughts were different. Who the fuck am I supposed to pray to? Who the hell am I supposed to pray to? While thinking that, Adrian quickly flashed through his mind Robert's gaze. "Goddess of the night, no thanks. Lord of the storm, no way. God of steam and machinery. Sherlock, I'm going to take a page from your book. I hope you don't mind." While he was thinking about whom to choose, a certain peeping detective appeared in his head, and with a small smile, he closed his eyes and began to pray. "Great God of steam and machinery. Embodiment of essence. Guardian of the craftsman. Brilliance of technology. I pray for your help. I pray for your loving grace. I pray for you to bless this food." After saying that, he drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest, all this in front of Robert's gaze, who waited for him to finish praying. Having done all that, Adrian opened his eyes and saw that Robert was looking at him with a small smile. "Also thanks to you for cooking, Robert. It's my pleasure. Adrian, would you like something to drink with your meal?" "Water, please." Nodding to the redhead, Robert went to the kitchen and returned with 2 glasses, one with wine and one with water. Placing the glass of water next to Adrian's plate, he brought his glass of wine to his mouth and took a small sip. The redhead grabbed his spoon and dipped it into the soup and brought it to his mouth. It tasted delicious. He could feel that the main ingredient was the carrot, but he could still feel the onion and parsley along with a bit of sweet flavor. The meat was soft and juicy. It looked like he had boiled it before putting it in the soup to absorb the juices from the soup. How are you? Is it to your liking? Ads by PubFuture. This is delicious, Robert. You have a talent for cooking. Thank you very much, Adrian. I was a little nervous because I didn't know if you were going to like it. Seriously, Robert, you should be a chef. This soup is delicious. Seeing Adrian's expression and listening to his words, Robert could only laugh. And seeing how he laughed, Adrian couldn't help but laugh a little too. To be honest, Adrian, when I get a bit more OIDER, I would love to be a chef. You're going to have to let me visit your restaurant then, because this soup is from another world. Adrian was not exaggerating when he said that Robert had the talent to be a chef. It is very likely that if he worked in a restaurant he would earn much more money than he earns working at the club as a secretary. It was a tragedy that someone with that talent was wasting that same talent working as a secretary instead of going to a restaurant to start working. Adrian, what do you do apart from going to the club? I think I already told you this, but I'm studying ancient languages. That's interesting, but why? I've always had a fascination for languages, so I decided to learn the ancient languages to keep myself busy. This was true of Adrian himself. Even in his life as Joa, he knew how to speak 4 languages, and because many of his favorite books were in Chinese, he was also studying it but couldn't finish it because of what happened, that would be waking up here. Besides, as a future architect, it was a requirement to be able to speak several languages to be able to communicate with the workers and the people who hire you. Leaving that aside, he also wanted to know more about Robert. Tell me, Robert, the first always see that you spend your time reading the books in the club being your favorite Stormwind Mountain Villa. At the question, the blonde scratched his cheek a bit uncomfortable while he drank another bit of wine. I have a lot of free time at the club and I'm always bored, so I recently started taking books to read and the writer Furs is my favorite. I thought so, the redhead thought with a smile as he continued eating. Ads by PubFuture. Tell me something else, Robert. Do you live alone? I live alone. My family lives in Tingen at the moment and I came here for other reasons. Robert's response was calm and simple, so Adrian just nodded as he drank some water. So they continued with the game of questions until they finished their dinner and Adrian had to go. Now Robert was saying goodbye to the redhead outside his house while the red moon was in the sky. Thank you very much for dinner, Robert, and I hope you enjoy the apple pie. Thank you for coming, Adrian. Be careful when you return home. A smile was on the face of Robert as he looked at Adrian. Nodding at the blonde's words, Adrian put on his hat and began to walk a bit before taking a public carriage and calmly heading home. Seeing how the redhead's carriage drove away, Robert's happy expression changed to a cold and indifferent one as he closed the door of his house. He calmly went up to the top floor of his house until he reached a study and entered after using some keys. The study was completely normal. There was nothing strange, but Robert went to a shelf on the wall and moved some books. It moved, revealing a hidden room. Inside this was a statue of a beautiful woman. Her hair is very long to her ankles and every single strand is as thick as a venomous snake. On the tip of strands, there were eyes. Robert knelt before this statue and began to pray in a low voice. Beside him was the familiar blue-covered book titled Stormwind Mountain Villa, but there was something wrong with it. The writings of the book were not the original story of the book but described a different one. At the beginning of creation, the creator had only one true inheritor. The primordial demoness was born from chaos.